Welcome to the 30 West IP studio. I'm Mitch, and this is the September 2019 Hot Topic webcast. This webcast was recorded on 5 September 2019. Things may have changed if you listen to this later. I want to take the opportunity to share that 30 West IP has incorporated a significant update to our online recurrent training. So if you're enrolled in our training program, you can go back in and look at all the new material and get up to date. We're constantly updating not only the content, but we're improving the user experience through navigation tools, new software, and graphics. During this update, we're going to address North Atlantic nonsense. I'm proposing the question, at what point is progress disruptive and counterproductive? While we may not have reached that point yet, it's certainly approaching that, with 8 North Atlantic Operation Bulletins published to date this year. So many of you recall or perhaps participated in the March webcast where we looked at the first batch of 4, and we're going to do that again. Additionally, today what we want to do is look at some rather significant changes in the U.S. Domestic CPDLC, and since I'm not an expert on that, I've got Erin Santiago with us, and she's going to begin the discussion today looking at some issues in the North American CPDLC implementation. We also want to mention that we're preparing our next webcast for 5 November. On that date, we're going to look at DCL Datalink and compare the U.S. and the European implementation of Domestic Datalink. We have a lot of questions about this, and we hope to address them in this discussion and all learn a little bit about how that's being done in the field. We're also going to do something really exciting. We're going to have an expert from a company called PlotNG talk about electronic plotting. We get a ton of questions on electronic plotting, and these folks have come up with a software that we think is going to help reduce errors. And if you've ever trained with us, we're always talking about trying to incorporate SOPs that allow you to reduce errors and mitigate risk. So we're excited about the electronic plotting discussion, and we look forward to having that discussion and very possibly not having to talk about another North Atlantic Operations Bulletin in the next 60 days. Now let's go ahead and get started. So Erin, why don't you pick this up here, and I'll let you step in and proceed.
Okay, sounds good. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay there. Again, as Mitch had said, my name is Erin Santiago. I'm with Collins Aerospace, ARINC Direct. And Mitch had asked me today to speak on some of the things going on in U.S. domestic for enroute and just everything. So we just have a couple slides here. First of all, I just wanted to add this in here for some operators who may not yet have seen this. As most of you are aware, there are now 62 DCL airports in the United States. So here is just a nice screen capture of all of those airports that are DCL capable, just for your reference. And you can go to the next slide, Mitch. Okay, so talking about U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC, just a couple of talking points here. First of all, as most of you all know, there is now a single sign-on for all things CPDLC in the domestic U.S. That is both FANS departure clearances for your departures and enroute CPDLC as well. There are plans in the future for all 20 U.S. sectors to be FANS capable. As of right now, there are only 2 active CPDLC capable sectors. Those are Kansas City and Indy. We'll look at that a little bit later. But there are plans for all 20 U.S. sectors to be FANS CPDLC capable. That deadline has now been pushed back to the end of 2021. If you remember, earlier in the year, the government shutdown that affected everyone. Unfortunately, that government shutdown really affected the FANS or U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC rollout schedule. All 20 sectors were expected to originally be rolled out by the end of 2020, or I'm sorry, actually Q1 of 2020. Now that deadline has been pushed back to the end of 2021. So for the remainder of 2019, there will be no additional sectors coming online. So it will only be Kansas City and Indy centers through the end of 2019. And then starting Q1 of 2020, FAA will start rolling out some new sectors. Also planned there, as I noted, future integration with foreign partners. And what I mean there is the actual handoff functionality. So as of right now, with only Kansas City and Indy centers being active, there is no handoff functionality to either New York Oceanic, Oakland Oceanic, or up into any of the Canadian domestic regions. But that functionality is planned. So as the sectors that are along the borders are activated, the FAA is looking at introducing the integration to hand off to those foreign or U.S. oceanic sectors as well. One of the main differences for U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC as opposed to CPDLC everywhere else in the world is that only VDL Mode 2 equipped operators are eligible to use U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC. That is indicated by the Juliet 4 filing in Field 10A of your ICAO flight plan. So only VDL Mode 2 is the media that can be used. SATCOM or POA, plain old ACARS, or VDL Mode Alpha are not used for U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC. Another requirement for U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC is the push-to-load functionality. So in the case where ATC would push a route clearance to your aircraft, you would use the functionality in through the FANS platform to activate or load that clearance automatically into your avionics. In order to use U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC, there are some additional FANS filing codes that are required as well for your ICAO flight plan. So in addition to the J4 filing code required in Field 10A, which indicates your capability, there are also some filing codes that are required in the Field 18 remarks section in what is called the DAT line, Delta Alpha Tango. And you will see in the flight plan Delta Alpha Tango slant, and then usually either the FANS E option or FANS ER. Commonly get questions as to what's the difference between FANS E and FANS ER. The difference in that is simply that FANS ER indicates what we call a UM80 load issue. A UM80 is an uplink message identifier number. UM80 is actually one of the clearance options. And what the UM80 load issue is that when a star is included, a standard arrival route is included with a clearance that's sent by ATC, there are certain avionics that cannot properly load that clearance. So what they do if you file FANS ER in your flight plan is that they strip the star out of the cleared route and then they append that as free text. So you can still utilize the push to load functionality for the route, and then you can manually enter that star route. One of the common questions I also get with this is, does this work for FANS DCL? And unfortunately, it does not. The FANS E and FANS ER, or specifically the FANS ER filing code, is only available in order to fix that UM80 load issue in en-route airspace. I know it doesn't really, it kind of seems counterintuitive to fix it in en-route when you're getting clearances all day long via CPDLC on the ground in the DCL environment. However, basically the reason, long story short on that, is that the FAA, of course, has their buckets of money. And at the time this problem was identified, all monies were being focused on en-route procedures. So as of right now, that's where the money is being focused. And possibly in the future, they may roll this back if there's money left at the end of the program to fix that for departure clearances as well. So also note here, if you are using FANS DCL for your departure clearances, as well as U.S. domestic en-route FANS, you may see the filing codes in the DAT line as one FANS E to PDC and one FANS ER to PDC are other options that you may see there. Any additional U.S. domestic filing codes. I know there's a lot of confusion as to all the codes that are available to file and how to properly file those codes. Please turn to the advisory circular 90-117. There's recently been an update to this advisory circular, but please take a look at it. There are all the filing codes that are available for the DAT line field of your flight plan. That is for both DCL for fans departure clearances, as well as your U.S. domestic en route fans. And one other thing here with these DAT line filing codes. First of all, these DAT line filing codes are specific to the United States. They're not used for CPDLC anywhere else in the world, and they're specific to the domestic United States. They're not even used for New York Oceanic or Oakland Oceanic. But the big thing for the DAT lines is when you file one FANS 2 PDC or one FANS E 2 PDC, anything in those DAT lines, it indicates your intent to participate. As opposed to in the past, you're probably used to filing to show equipment capability. With the DAT line, it indicates your intent to participate. And this is particularly important now during the testing phases of this program. Even though Kansas City and Indianapolis are up and live right now, they are in the testing phases. And so by filing the one FANS E2 PDC, that indicates your intent to participate using FANS to pick up your departure clearance and then PDC as a backup. It also indicates your intent to participate in en route airspace. So filing one FANS E2 PDC or one FANS ER 2 PDC or any version of the FANS E or FANS ER filing codes, that indicates to ATC that you will be remaining logged on or you will be logging on for en route services. So if you do not intend to participate or are not capable at this time, please ensure that the FANS E or FANS ER filing codes are removed from your flight plans. One other thing that I wanted to mention here regarding U.S. domestic en route CPDLC is that as of right now, again, this initial rollout is a very limited CPDLC message set. So please keep that in mind that not all CPDLC exchanges will be done via CPDLC, or not all, sorry, exchanges will be done via CPDLC. Some may be done via voice. You can go ahead to the next slide, Mitch. Okay, so here is a look of those 20 U.S. sectors and when they will be rolling out. As you can see right now, 2 key sites that are currently active are Kansas City and Indy centers. And then as you can also see, the next sites to roll out are is ZDC is next, and then Atlanta follows after that. Originally, this key site map, Memphis, was supposed to be one of the original sites to roll out, but you'll now see again as a result of that government shutdown, that sector has rolled or pushed the whole way out until March of 2021. So keep in mind this rollout isn't quite as seamless as we hoped it to be. What we hoped for was for all the sectors as they rolled out to be connected. And for the most part, they are, there will just be a little gap there with Memphis for a little bit until they do come online. You can go ahead over to the next slide. Okay, one thing that has become a recent issue here in U.S. domestic en route CPDLC, and again, this is only U.S. domestic en route CPDLC. It was actually disabled by the FAA in August of this year. It's kind of been off and on, to be honest, all year long, again, due to it being in the testing phases. But the latest issue that was notified, and you may have seen notifications from either ARINC Direct or from MBAA, I know also put out a notice on this. But there was issues that were identified from a ground network perspective. So these are not issues that are tied to the aircraft. They're issues from the ground network perspective. And basically what was happening was it was a delayed delivery of message acknowledgements from the aircraft. So messages were getting to the aircraft in a timely manner. Just the delivery of the message acknowledgement from the aircraft was being delayed. As a result, controllers thought that possibly crews did not get messages. So as a result, operators that use ARINC the ARINC network for their data link services have been asked to not file those FANS E or FANS ER codes until the fix is put in place for this. Good news in regards to this is that fix is expected to be put into place a week from today, September the 11th. And so hopefully by the end of next week at the latest, all operators should be receiving notification to go ahead and resume filing the FANS E and FANS ER codes if you intend to participate in U.S. domestic enroute CPDLC. You can go ahead over to the next slide. Okay, this is actually a sample of an email that I have sent out to many users to let everyone know what is going on regarding this issue. Again, the FAA is actively working with ARINC Global Link to fix this issue. Estimate to complete on that fix is for September 11th. And again, most importantly, this only affects Kansas City and Indianapolis enroute CPDLC. It does not affect any CPDLC operations outside of the U.S. FAA definitely wanted to keep certain operators that were not affected by this in use. That way, everybody, controllers and things like that, could stay current using CPDLC, and we didn't have to have any more slowdowns again or any more delays in the program. So until this identified fix is in place, as you can see, there are a couple examples, but what you needed to do, or what you will need to do, is remove the FANS E or FANS ER filing code. So there are a couple examples there. If you file DAT 1 FANS E to PDC, that entry will be modified to just now 1 FANS to PDC. Same thing for FANS ER. And then if you only file the DAT line FANS E or FANS ER, you would remove that entry in its entirety, leaving the DAT field blank. If you decide to leave the FANS E or FANS ER filing codes in there, I realize it's only about a week to get this fixed. However, if you leave it in there, unfortunately, what can happen is the FAA could put you on what's called the block list. And the problem with being put on the block list is that there is only one block list for 2 services. Those 2 services being U.S. domestic enroute FANS, as well as U.S. domestic FANS for your departure clearances. So if you end up on that block list, you will also be blocked for DCL services, which, if you remove the FANS E or FANS ER filing, you will be able to continue using FANS DCL services throughout this whole process. So if there is any question that you are on the block list, please feel free to give me a call. Again, my name is Erin Santiago, and I can be reached at the regular ARINC Direct Tech Support phone number. That is 410-266-2266, option number 5 for tech support. Again, that's 410-266-2266. Option number 5 for tech support. If you need my assistance, also, if you think you may be on that block list, please feel free to give me a call and I can get in touch with the FAA to get you removed off of that block list. Next slide, I believe that is all for me.
That's what we've got, but I'd like to, if you have a moment, I know if you've got to go, that's fine. I think you might have to go.
No, that's fine. I can go ahead and stay on for a question or two.
Okay, Ed, you want to field a couple questions?
Okay, Steve Thorpe's got a question about getting his A06 LOA. It still has domestic CPDLC prohibited, and they're waiting for the PBCS approval one. So he wants to make sure he's still not supposed to file as capable.
That is correct. You would want to remove that FANS E filing, especially if you have any indications in your LOA A056 limitation section that would show U.S. domestic CPDLC. You definitely want to not file FANS E or FANS ER until that limitation is removed. Technically, there is no LOA requirement for Part 91 operations. However, you still do have to be properly equipped, meaning VDL mode 2 capable, push to load capable, as well as the TSOC 160 alpha or greater, which is a VDL mode 2 multi-frequency radio requirement.
And just to add a note to that, I talked to Greg Sparks at the FAA last month, and they have Harris tracking flight plan filings with LOAs being matched up out of a computer database, and they're sending cease and desist notices. And this isn't based on actual equipage and capabilities, it's based on LOAs and what you have filed in your flight plan. So Steve, that goes directly to your question.
And then next up, Greg's asking about is VDL mode 2 needed for the CPDLC DCL? It says SATCOM used to work until recently.
Yeah, so technically VDL mode alpha and VDL mode 2 are the two recommended or actually required media for FANS DCL. There were times in the past when SATCOM would work. However, I believe the FAA is starting to restrict on that because the two required media for that are only VDL mode alpha and or VDL mode 2.
And then John Whelan had a comment about the ATSUs not being able to see your DAT codes, and says you're going to use CPDLC enroute if you remain logged on to KUSA, even if you filed DCL only. So it used to be it would drop off, between 5 and 10 minutes automatically. Now it's not going to log you off.
So the way that works is if you file the FANS-E or FANS-ER filing code, you will no longer be logged off. Again, that speaks to that's what I spoke to earlier, which is filing FANS-E or FANS-ER indicates your intent to participate. So if you file from a departure airport, either within either of those two sectors, or you're flying through Kansas City or Indy at any time, and you file FANS-E and FANS-ER, if you are logged on to get your departure clearance, instead of being terminated after departure, you will remain logged on in order to receive en route services. If you depart from an airport that is not DCL capable, and you file FANS-E or FANS-ER, you would be expected to log on in order to receive those services. And then finally, if you're departing from an airport that is DCL capable, as I'd said, if you do not file the FANS-E or FANS-ER filing, you would be terminated. It's approximately 7 minutes after departure. Your logon would automatically be terminated since you would not be intending to use en route services.
And we've got a final question. As a Part 91 international pilot, I heard it said that an Alpha 056 is not as of now required. Can you please confirm? And I think, Aaron, you were simply talking about for U.S. domestic operations. But if you do have an Alpha 056 and it is restricting you, you cannot participate. Would that be correct?
That's absolutely correct. So Part 91 operators are not required to have an LOA for U.S. domestic en route CPDLC and U.S. domestic DCL. That is only Part 91 operators, and that is only U.S. domestic services for en route and DCL. The LOA A056 is required, though, for using CPDLC anywhere outside of the U.S., for data link operations anywhere outside of the domestic U.S.
Yeah, and if it restricted you, you would be restricted because it states in there that's how they're doing the testing with Harris to compare. And you mentioned in the question here that they mentioned a B039. The B039 is for the North Atlantic and is unrelated to domestic. Aaron, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. This has been extremely helpful. We haven't gotten to all the questions, but we'd be here for another 45 minutes answering questions if we didn't move on. So we're going to go to the North Atlantic, and then at the completion of the webinar, we're going to try to come back and address each of these questions if we can. So once again, we appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Now we're going to move into the North Atlantic high-level airspace and the bulletins that we're here to talk about today. We just want to kind of update on a few things. There's, when it comes to the latency monitor operations, this bulletin came out, 15 months ago, and it stated that all the centers would use the latency monitor setting, but we only saw Iceland do it. So Iceland did away with the initial welcome message because when they sent the selection for you to set 300 seconds, it accomplished a comm check, the purpose of the welcome message, as well as instructing the crew to go ahead and perform that function. So if you've been up in Iceland, you've probably seen this, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to respond to it in just a moment. But Iceland was the only sector using it until July, and since our last webcast, Portugal has begun utilizing it. So here we see that they're also sending a 300-second setting for the system. So if you receive that and you have that capability, go ahead and set that 300 seconds. If you have a compliant aircraft, it's fairly easy. This is a Honeywell. We'll look at a Collins in just a second. And if you're in an airplane that is not compliant, then you accept the message, and then when you get to remarks, you simply type in timer not available. We have a little bit more expansive discussion of this in our recurrent. If you're in a Rockwell Collins and you receive this, you simply accept it, and the Rockwell Collins sets the timing. Later we may see 240 seconds or 210 seconds, and it would automatically set those settings into the Rockwell Collins, whether it's a Enhanced ProLine or a Vision, either one. So there's just an additional expansion of the use of latency timer. We do understand that Gander and Shanwick will eventually get there to doing that, but they have some ways to go with software. There are a host of bulletins that we want to just touch lightly on, the primary purpose of the webcast. One of them is the redefinition of the NAT Datalink Mandate. That's really important, and we're going to start with that. The other is Datalink performance improvements, and this is a bulletin that talks about some techniques to improve the way Datalink works for you, and we're going to let you read that. It's an important bulletin, but a lot of times the communication service provider has already provided this information. We're going to discuss operations without assigned fixed speed. This has been going on for a while. It's not entirely new. It was implemented by NOTAM earlier this year, but there's some important points to touch on, so we will. And this is a real big one. The trial implementation of further reduced lateral separation for the ASEPS program. It's not terribly complicated, so we won't have to spend a great deal of time on it, but it's real important. These 4 bulletins came out, with 3 of them affecting airspace on the 9th of July. The lateral reduction won't occur till 10 October, so we'll cover that. And that's a lot of change, particularly when we talk about there were 4 bulletins issued, 3 of them with implementations on 28 March. So in the last 6 months, we have seen tremendous change in the North Atlantic. So this is simply an effort to go ahead and ensure that we keep that going, keep everybody up to date. We always like to remind you that this information is in JEPFD. If you go into the European Airway Manual and you go to the ATC section, there's an Atlantic tab, and then you'll see North Atlantic high level airspace. There's some other great points in here. This is the ASEPS bulletin right here. We have the PBCS bulletin, we have the latency timer bulletin. There's a host of things in here that are really helpful. So we're just trying to keep you abreast of where to find it without having to go in and look at the bulletin itself. I want to take a Jepson plotting chart and use it to explore the Datalink Mandate. And this was one of the bulletins that was issued some years ago, but was updated in July. And this is a really big deal, and it's a big benefit for us. The area that you see here in yellow would be areas where they require fans 1A, CPDLC and ADSC both, and you'd have to have an approval for that with an Alpha 056. Currently, in the yellow area, you're required to have it flight levels 3.5 to 3.9 inclusive. But what's going to happen is we're going to see on 30 January 2020 that expanded, and originally the document said that it would expand to flight level 290 and above. This would put us at a significant disadvantage in the business aviation community, because those operators able to obtain 4.3 and 4.5 would have to have fans, and they wouldn't have a workaround if they had an MEL issue. So this was revised to our favor in this bulletin, so that when it does implement the expansion in 30 January 2020, it will be limited to flight level 290 to 410. So there's a piece we wanted to touch on. Additionally, they don't have a data link mandate in the polar region, and they don't have a data link mandate in the New York area. The area that we see in blue is ATS surveillance airspace, air traffic services surveillance airspace, and that's where radar and or ADS-B with direct VHF communications available, and that airspace does not require fans and you're not restricted by altitude. So if I were in an airplane that was unable to obtain 430 and 450 and I were to have to MEL my fans and I still wanted to go to Europe, I could transit through that blue region, but we want to caution you that you do not want to enter the yellow sectors that require fans. And that's it's going to be another big advantage. To kind of think of this as the blue spruce routes of the future. So that's an important bulletin. The next one, I'm just going to touch lightly on what we talked about in March with ASEPS. This is Advanced Surveillance Enhanced Procedural Separation, space-based ADS-B, if you will. It's a new separation standard. We touched on it earlier. If you're in a domestic airspace, like the US, we will continue after our implementation of ADS-B to use our ground-based system to separate airplanes because it responds to aircraft positioning every 1.13 seconds. This space-based system is only 8 seconds, but we'll see it used in the United States to track airliners for companies to perform functions like that. Where it really has an advantage is an area like Edmonton up in Canada that doesn't have ground-based surveillance, or countries like New Zealand that don't have ground-based surveillance. They're going to be able to have real-time surveillance with space-based ADS-B, as well as the oceanic regions. And the private company that has started this program is owned in part by NAV Canada and the Irish ATC authorities. So the initial oceanic trial program is in, of course, Gander and Shanwick as a result of that relationship. It is defined in JEP-FD, again, under the ATC section for the North Atlantic. And I'm going to borrow from a little bit of our discussion in March. If you're operating without Datalink, you're going to be separated by 10 minutes longitudinally. That's 10 minutes ahead and behind you as you space through that region. But if you had Datalink, you could see that reduced to 5 minutes, approximately 40 miles. If you have ASEPS, it will allow 6 airplanes to occupy that same space, and there have 14 nautical mile longitudinal separation. This brings a lot of efficiencies to those crowded altitudes that the airlines predominantly occupy, but it benefits us all as that they can reduce this, and it will also help with en route climbs. So ASEPS initially, starting in March, only reduced longitudinal separation, and it reduced it to 14 nautical miles. You could have seen this employed at higher altitudes as well as lower altitudes. That just sets the stage work. We had a much more expansive discussion of that in our March webcast. For us to talk about the lateral implementation, and this goes into effect on 10 October, so it's about a month, about 5 weeks from now, actually. And on that date, Shanwick, Gander, and Santa Maria will commence a 19 nautical mile lateral spacing program of parallel and non-intersecting tracks. So they're specifically identifying tracks here. We're going to, as they mentioned here, we're going to know more about this when the AICs come out from the particular operational managers of the airspace like Gander and Shanwick. The way they're going to achieve it is currently east to west operations in the track system are limited to 3 degrees of slope between waypoints. So every 10 degrees, you could see 3 degrees of slope. And if you were going straight east to west, half degree would be 30 nautical miles. But in that slope, it could be as little as 25.25. What they're going to do with 19 mile separation with ASEPS is they're going to allow that slope to be increased to 4 degrees. And that would be how they achieve 19 nautical miles of separation. There's no new waypoints being created, and the current routing system won't change. The track system will change with the availability of a steeper slope for tracks, but beyond that, the track message will look the same. So although this seems alarming, at least it seemed alarming to me, understanding it and how it's being implemented makes it a bit more benign. However, we're going to be operating closer in the North Atlantic than we've ever been once this is started. So what they've done is they've created a requirement for ACAS, well, most of you call TCAS, ICAO calls ACAS. ACAS will have to be operational to be in that track system at the altitudes where it's in effect. And if you did not have that, you would have to ensure it's in the remarks section of your flight plan and or that you notified ATC prior to entry, 30 minutes prior to entry, or if it happened after you entered, to notify them immediately of the failure of your ACAS. They want you to be able to see airplanes around you while you're in that reduced separation. That kind of makes sense. Remember, ADS-B is not going to be required in the North Atlantic. They feel that the North American implementation, European implementation will help that. Operators don't have to apply to participate. The capabilities that you file in your flight plan will be used to determine who's eligible. You will have to be PBCS as well as ADS-B, so you'd have to have Datalink with RCP 240, RSP 180, RNP 4 plus ADS-B. So there's quite a few things that tie into this, but there's no specific LOA for ASEPS. And in the past, when we've done implementations, you're all familiar, they usually assign like the center 3 tracks, 3.5 to 3.9 for a trial program. And this one is unique. There is no lateral boundary and there's no vertical boundary. So you could be reduced at altitudes above and below the track system. But above and below the track system, it would be limited to longitudinal reductions, the 14 nautical miles in trail, as opposed to 19 nautical miles left to right. That apparently will be initially the track system only. And as I said before, we'll be looking to ensure that we read those AICs and possibly see in November when we do our webcast what additional information is available. Now, they mention in the original ASEPS bulletin the strategic lateral offset procedures won't change, but here they say that strategic lateral offset procedures in the NAT remain applicable, and that's because they did change those, and that will be the next subject of discussion here in just a moment. And then following a discussion of the changes in Slop, we're going to briefly just touch on the fact that there's some new contingency procedures. We're not going to go through them. We went through them in March, and that webcast is available on our YouTube channel, and we'll show you how to go look at that if you haven't seen it. The North Atlantic Operations Manual is in its 3rd edition this year, another indication of a rather large series of changes. And in here, they talk about Slop, and they've redefined Slop. We're going to call it Microswap. There's been some pushback from some of the aerospace managers. They don't like the term Microswap. But if you don't change the name when you create a new version of Slop, if you have 2 versions of Slop, you need to have 2 names. So we're going to go with Microswap. Nomenclature is important to us. Now, what they're doing here is they're talking about offsets in tenths of a mile up to 2 nautical miles. In my humble opinion, this is poorly written, and I think you'll understand why in just a moment. This is a NOTAM, and this NOTAM from Shanwick states that they have changed strategic lateral offset procedures within their area, and they're adopting the procedures in DOC 4444. That's different than what's in DOC 007, and we're going to get more information when the AICs come out. Notice how Shanwick takes the liberty to decide that the entire NAT region will do this. We're going to see NOTAMs come out for different sectors. Shanwick really, in their NOTAMs, should limit their implementations to Shanwick, not the entire region. Looking at DOC 4444, that ICAO guidance that talks about so many important things, in section 16.5, they talk about Slop, and they changed this back in 2014, and they mentioned that where spacing is more than 23 nautical miles to the offset, it could be done in tenths of a mile up to a maximum of 2 miles. So 0.1, 0.3, 0.8, 1.2, things like that. However, they go on to state that where lateral separation is 6 nautical miles or more and less than 23. Now that would be this 19 nautical mile ASEPS section. Offsets to the right of center line would be in tenths of a nautical mile up to a maximum of 0.5. They didn't mention that in the NAT Ops manual, but it is here in DOC 4444, and we're seeing the NOTAMs to come out. They are saying that they're doing it consistent with DOC 4444. That's why the AIP amendments are going to be so important. We're going to want to catch up with that. Basically, courtesy of the ops group, thank you, David Mumford, Mark Z. Always appreciate the help and the support we get from them. Everybody's allowing you to do this at this point, except Iceland and New York, and they are supposed to begin next week, September 12th, which is literally a week from today. Here you see Reykjavik, and they've published that they're doing it in accordance with Doc 4444, and they're going to amend their AIP. So we got some photos yesterday, and I absolutely love this. Every time somebody sends us information, like, you know, they got latency timer setting in Santa Maria that allowed us to go in and do the research there. Well, we got pictures from a crew that were doing Microswap and Gander, and I just want to shout out and say thank you. I appreciate that. So we made some graphics to show how they had selected Microswap, what they had decided to do with it. Of course, they had options that were different values, but they decided to go 0.5 nautical miles right. But when they got their confirm assigned route, they saw something that was a little unanticipated, and I'm just reproducing it here. It said deviations up to 1 nautical mile, as opposed to deviating 1 nautical mile right 1 nautical mile. So it's a little bit of difference there. Not you know, terribly important perhaps, but notable. And none of us like surprises. So I really appreciate it when folks share stuff like that, and we're able to include it in the webcast and the updates. So hats off. Operations without assigned fixed speed. As I had previously mentioned, this was went into effect by NOTAM some months ago, and it's being codified here, which is helpful. This is what we're seeing in a lot of cockpits. You'll be flying along and receive a message that says resume normal speed. But it's not limited to data link airplanes. You could receive this message via HF or any kind of communication actually in the North Atlantic. And we want to explore what that means and what you're required to do. So let's go in and take a look at that bulletin. If the aircraft receives resume normal speed, the flight crew no longer needs to comply with the previously issued MOC. There will be a previously issued MOC. You will continue to get clearances that include MOC number, and you're expected to maintain them. However, if you receive this message, then if you want to change your speed, you advise ATC. Anytime you want to change your speed by 0.02 Mach or more from your last assigned speed. So if let's say I'm going 8.3. Well, I could go 8.4 or 8.2, but if I wanted to go 8.5, I would need to send them a message. This is another one of those things where I've read this and seen it stated that if you need to change your speed by more than 0.02, and that's not correct. Literally, it's 0.02 or more. So we want to emphasize that. And we also want to emphasize that this isn't a whole really big deal, because I used to have to request a speed change. They send me this message. Now I have to advise of a speed change, and they still have the ability to restrict me after I've advised them. It requires a communication in either case if that change in speed is more than 0.02 or more. So it will continue to require a communication. And oceanic clearances will remain unchanged. They will provide a fixed MOC, and you will be expected to maintain that MOC until such time as you are cleared to resume normal speed. Now, the resume normal speed's really meant to help the airlines with the economy mode. And a lot of times the airlines in the North Atlantic are going to be operating at altitudes where they're fairly congested longitudinally. So I don't know that we're not going to be the people that get the biggest benefit out of that. Can you imagine an airplane at 400 or 41 or 3 or 45? We often don't have airplanes close to us in longitudinal separation. And the way that that's managed is they're just feeding information into a computer and says, who has enough longitudinal separation and sequence that the speed wouldn't matter? And I would contend that it will largely be our community if you operate at 400 and above. We have seen a number of photographs from operators who've received these already. Now, this is a notice from the FAA, and it's meant to go to their ops inspectors, and it talks about approval to operate in the NAT HLA. It's pretty important, so we just want to take a moment and touch on it. It's about the North Atlantic High-Level Airspace LOA B039. There are more than 1,000 of these that are out there that have not been updated to the NAT HLA. They still say NAT MNPS. Those are all at Part 91 operators. I do believe that there's probably 200 or 300 that are part of flight departments that no longer exist, that weren't properly taken off the books. But nonetheless, there's a significant number of Part 91 operators that are operating with MNPS approvals. And those MNPS approvals will no longer be effective and provide you with authorizations after 1 January 2020. So if you have an MNPS approval, it will not allow you to operate in the NAT HLA after January 1st, 2020. So we would encourage you to ensure that you're operating with the new version of the NAT HLA B039. And if you are going to apply for a new B039, the NAT HLA requirements would require you to be able to demonstrate that you'd had training on ARINC 10. If you've been training with us, you've had that training, and if you have any issues with letters, we would be happy to answer and resolve that very easily. I'm sure Sean Scott, Guy Gribble, anybody can help to resolve that. But we are, of course, there to support our clients. We've been doing this for some time. If you're submitting for this, they're also going to want to confirm that the crew has been trained and they're aware of the new contingency procedures. We went through those in March, and they're fairly significant. And they mention here handbooks and flight manuals. And if you're operating with JEP-FD, using it for a reference, that's a great resource because they keep it up to date. And that's really fairly straightforward. And I'm going back to a March 28th implementation here for these new contingency procedures, just to touch ever so lightly on this. These are not just the contingencies in the North Atlantic, but they're also weather deviation procedures. If you're in JEP-FD with a route of flight in the North Atlantic, if you select the pubs, as soon as you select the pubs button, you're going to get the correct contingency procedures right there on the first pubs page. You can select that and it will come right out of Doc 007, and those are the correct ones. So I'm just kind of trying to drive you towards the right reference and resource. If you had a route through the Pacific and you hit pubs, it would come up with the Pacific contingency procedures, which are the original ICAO procedures, and notably different. So your route will drive you to the right selection. Again, Ops Group provided a great graphic and some support for that. We worked with them on an article, and David Mumford and Mark Z did this, and it's part of what we're handing out, and it's part of the material that we use for support. But we've embedded this in our graphics. We had a graphic artist adapt this for our training, so it's part of our current courseware as well. We did a webcast back in March, and we call it the NAT Game Changer. And if you go to our website, 30westip.com, and you look at the splash page, there's a selection for the YouTube channel. And you can go into that YouTube channel and you can select NAT Game Changer and review those contingency procedures. There in that section there. This webcast will be on that list as soon as it's edited, and we continue to put those up there. And remember, there is no cost to these things, and you can invite anybody you want to be part of these webcasts. This is really a chance for us to have a collaborative discussion and to hear from you and take your questions and interact. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to tell you how much I appreciate your participation, and we're going to take questions now, but I want to remind you, you don't have to limit your questions to here and now. You can write emails to me, Mitch, at 30westip.com. And we hope to see you again in November when we look at electronic plotting and catch up with the AICs that eventually come out with this. So thank you for participating, and this will close it for the captured recorded version, and now we'll go to questions.